Hey guys, welcome to RNSimplexNursing.com, and I'm a registered nurse over here. In this video, we'll be talking about directional terms and anatomical planes. Talking about directional terms. Directional terms simply refers to those terminologies used to refer to various positions of the body parts in anatomy and physiology, while anatomical plane simply refers to those imaginary lines that are drawn over the body surfaces used to bisect the body. But for now, first of all, let's talk about the directional terms. Now, talking about directional terms, like I said earlier, they are terms used to describe what the various body positions in anatomy and physiology. So the first directional terms which we'll talk about is the superior. Now, when we say something is superior, it simply means that it is on the upper part. That's on the upper part of it, or towards the head, towards the up of the body. Just like when you stand in an anatomical position with your head facing forward and your hands at the side, upright, looking upright, that is an anatomical position. Now, in that position your head is the uppermost part of the body. So it is called the superior position. It can also be referred to as the cephalic. You get that now? So it's in the upper part. So we can say that the head is superior to the neck. That's an example of that, using the superior anatomical term. While the next which we'll talk about now is what? Inferior. Now, inferior is simply referring to what? The lower part, or tending towards the leg, or towards the lower part, that's moving downward. So going to the leg or the lower part of the body. It can also be referred to as what? As caudal, meaning tail, towards the tail. Since the tail is lower and the head is higher, so the head is cephalic and the tail is what? Caudal. So the inferior part is, which tends towards the lower part, is what? Moving downward. An example of that is what? The neck is inferior to the head. Since the head is above the neck, it simply means that what? The neck is below the head. So the neck is inferior to the head. You get that now? So the next which we'll talk about now is anterior. When you say something is anterior, as this arrow, as indicated by this arrow now, you can see that the arrow is pointing to this object at the front of it. So anterior simply refers to what? Front. And when you say anterior, it simply means that what? A body part or an organ is located at the front of another structure. Then the next example of such is the transverse colon. The transverse colon is located in an anterior portion of the liver. That it is lying in front of the liver. Then the next which we will look at is posterior. When you say posterior, posterior simply refers to what? Back. What comes to your mind when you hear the word posterior is what? Back. And from this arrow here, it can be shown that what? The arrow is pointing forward with the line at the back. So to say that what? This line is posterior to it. So we can say, given an example now, we can say that what? The kidney is posterior to the intestine in the abdomen. So the next which we'll talk about is what? Medial. When you say medial, medial simply means that what? It stands towards the midline. That is going near the midline. It is near the midline. That's close to the middle of it. And from this arrow now, you can see that yes, these two arrows are coming from different sides, and this line is in between them. So when you hear the word medial, it means what? It is at the middle or near the middle. So the next which we'll talk about is what? Is lateral. Now, when you hear the word lateral, what should come to your mind is what? It is at both ends. That's at two opposite ends. Meaning it is going away from the midline. Going far away from the midline. Now, let's take example of the medial and lateral together. Now, when you say medial, looking at the face, for instance, now, these are the two eyes and this is the nose. So we can say that what? The nose is medial to the eyes and the eyes are lateral to the nose. So the nose is at the middle, while the eyes is what? At the other side, at the side of it. So it is what? Lateral. Or you can say the ears are lateral to the what? To the nose. Whichever one you want to say, you want to take. Then when you say, the next now is what? Proximal. Now taking proximal now, proximal simply means what? It is near to the point of origin or near to the point of what? Attachment. That's what proximal simply means. When you hear proximal, it means what? It is closer to the point of attachment or point of origin where it arises from. So we can say now that the what? The shoulder, the tip of the humerus, which forms the shoulder joint, is proximal to the what? To the scapula. You get that now? It's proximal to the scapula. By the word distal, and the next one is what? Distal. Distal simply means what? It's far from the point of attachment or point of origin. It's far away. So when you're going downward, it means you are going, if this is the point of origin for the shoulder joint, then you're coming downward. It means what? You're taking it distal. So you're taking it to the distal part of it. That's you're going far away. Meaning the phalanges, that's this. The phalanges are distal to the shoulder joint. You get it now? So the next anatomical term which we'll talk about now is what? Intermediate. Intermediate. Intermediate simply means that what? The structure, when you say is a structure or an organ is intermediate to other organs, it simply means that what? It lies between two organs. An intermediate organ means is what? It is in between two organs. That's you have one here at this side and there is another one at this side. So an example, that's then the main organ which we're talking about is at the middle of those two various organs. And now an example of that is the heart. The heart, which is in the thoracic cavity, is intermediate to the left and the right lungs. The heart is intermediate to the left lung and the right lung, which means the lungs is on one side and there's one lung at the right side and another lung at the left side. But the lungs, the heart is at the middle of those two lungs, meaning it is intermediate to it. Or we can also take another example. The transverse colon, which lines horizontally, is intermediate to the what? Descending and ascending colon. That's the ascending colon and the descending colon, which lies laterally. And the transverse colon is medial to it. It's on the medial plane that lies horizontally. The transverse colon is simply referred to as being what? Intermediate. The position of the transverse colon is what? Intermediate to the two colons. That's the descending and ascending colon. Then the next one now which we'll talk about is what? Ipsilateral. Now when you hear ipsilateral, ipsilateral simply means that when you say ipsilateral, it means that what? The structure, two structures are on the same position. They are on what? The same position. Two organs are on similar position, like this one is here and the other one is here. One is anterior to the other or posterior to the other, but they are on the same position. That's what ipsilateral. Right? When you hear the word contralateral, now the next which we'll talk about is contralateral. Now contralateral simply means what? It is, they are both on the lateral side, but on opposite sides. Now we have one here and we have another here. This ear is contralateral to this other ear. Lateral to this other ear. So meaning that what? These two ears are on the opposite sides to each other. Meaning what? They are contralateral. You get that now? One on this lateral side, the other one on this lateral side. So it's opposite. One on the right, the other one on the left. So when you say, the next now is what? Superficial. When you say superficial, superficial means what? It tends towards the surface or is at the surface. So for instance now, licking the arm, for instance, the skin is superficial to the what? The skin is superficial to the bone that lies deep within them. By saying deep now, it means what? It's away from the surface, meaning the skin, the bones now that are inside the hand are deep. You get that now? Or when you take the thoracic cavity as an example also, we can say that what? The intercostal muscles are superficial, while the thoracic organs like the heart are deep within the thoracic cavity. The intercostal muscles are superficial to the thoracic cavity, while the intercostal muscles are what? Are deep. Sorry, the intercostal muscles are superficial within the thoracic cavity, while the thoracic organs such as the heart, the lungs, great blood vessels, they lie deep within the thoracic cavity. We're talking about the anatomical planes. Like we said earlier, anatomical planes simply refers to those imaginary lines that are drawn over the body structures or organs in order to aid their description. Now, when we say anatomical planes, we have a mnemonic for them, and that mnemonic is what? Soft. There are 4 basic anatomical planes, and they can be represented with the mnemonic soft. And when you say soft, soft simply means what? Sagittal, oblique, frontal, and transverse. Now, we'll be using this diagram over here for the description, and follow along, pay attention, so you will understand what we're talking about. Now, when we say the first one is what? Is sagittal. Now, the sagittal plane is an imaginary line that is drawn vertically over the body, and it divides the body into 2 left and right parts. That's into 2 lateral parts, the left side and the right side. Now, taking this diagram for example, looking at this diagram now, we can see that if this is just a sketch work of an individual in an anatomical position, the sagittal plane, as you can see, is drawn vertically from the top to the bottom, and it divides the body into 2 sides. That's the right side and the left side. You get that now? And this sagittal plane can also be referred to as the medial plane. That's another name for it. The sagittal plane is also referred to as the medial plane because it runs through the midline. That's through the middle. You get that now? So a sagittal plane, or an imaginary vertical line that runs from the superior part of the body to the inferior part of it, or the superior part of the structure to the inferior part of the structure, and it doesn't divide it into equal parts, is called a parasabital plane because it is not running through the midline. You get that now? But when it runs through the midline, it's called a medial plane or a sagittal plane, and when it doesn't run through the midline, it is called what? A parasabital plane. But take note, they are both vertical planes. Now the next which we'll talk about is, we'll come back to the oblique. We'll come back to this. Let's talk about the frontal plane. Now another name for the frontal plane is is the coronal plane. As you can see here, the frontal plane is also referred to as the coronal plane. Now the frontal plane is an imaginary line also. It runs vertically, but this imaginary line divides the body into the anterior and the posterior part. This imaginary line divides the body into an anterior and a posterior part. That's the front and the back. So why do we call it a coronal plane? Now, have you ever considered a person putting on a crown? Coronal refers to crown. Now, have you ever considered a person putting on a crown? The crown goes this way over the head, right? So the coronal plane takes the line of the head. That means it goes this way, separating the body downward. Unlike the sagittal plane that comes like this one goes this way. It goes like this. So it takes the line of the crown. You get that now? So the frontal plane, like we said earlier, I repeat again, it divides the body into the anterior and the posterior part. Now the next which we'll talk about, which is the T, which is the T part of the soft, is the transverse plane. Now, unlike the frontal and the sagittal plane, the transverse plane runs from 2 lateral points. This is one lateral point, and this is another lateral point of it, and it divides the body into into superior and inferior part. Now, the transverse plane is an imaginary horizontal line, and it runs from 2 lateral points. That's from the right side to the left side, or from the left side to the right side, dividing the body into superior and inferior portion. Superior and inferior portion. You get that now? So it's dividing it into up and down. Now the next which we'll look at now is is the oblique. The oblique plane. The oblique plane is also an imaginary line, but this is not taking a straight path. It's a slant imaginary line. So it runs through the transverse plane and either the frontal or sagittal plane. You get it now? It runs through the transverse plane and either the sagittal or frontal plane. Now it divides the body into, or it divides the structure into a triangular portion or a trapezium. You get that now? So it gives us two different parts with a slashed end. So if we bring out the structure now, we have a superior part like this, and an inferior part like this. So we have something like this because of what? The cut from it this way. So you get it now? So this is how it would look like. So these are the four anatomical planes which we've discussed in the video. Remember, subscribe to the channel so you'll be the first to be notified whenever a new video has been uploaded, and share with your friends and professionals.